James always knew the flat sprawl of small-town life wasn't his cage, a restless itch clawing at him since he could walk the dusty gravel roads of rural Indiana, a place where the horizon was just cornstalks bending under a heavy sky and the only sound at dusk was the hum of crickets or the faint clatter of his dad's tools echoing from the garage. He grew up in a sagging clapboard house on the edge of Shelbyville, a nowhere south of Indianapolis, the third of 5 kids in a family that scraped by on grit and grease. His father, Tom, ran a backlot mechanic gig, fixing beat-up Fords and Chevys for farmers and mill workers, hands stained black, voice rough from years of yelling over engines. His mom, Linda, kept the house from falling apart, stitching clothes, canning tomatoes, stretching every dime till it screamed. Days were a grind, up before the sun, hauling parts or sweeping the shop floor, school a blurry afterthought, then home to crash on a mattress that sagged like his dreams. But inside James, something burned, not hate for his roots, not resentment for the sweat-soaked life his folks carved out, but a hunger, sharp and unyielding, to bust out, to prove he wasn't just another kid doomed to rust in the Midwest. He'd sit on the splintered porch steps at night, staring at the stars over the fields, imagining a world bigger than oil cans and tractor ruts, a life where he called the shots, not the seasons or his dad's temper. At 16, he started sneaking off to the woods with an old .22 rifle his uncle left behind, picking off cans and squirrels, his aim steadying with every crack of the trigger. It wasn't just play, it was control, a taste of something he could master when everything else felt like quicksand. By 18, staying put wasn't an option, it was a slow choke he couldn't stomach. He enlisted in the U.S. Air Force, a choice that hit like a freight train, thrilling and terrifying, yanking him from the sleepy safety of Shelbyville into a grinder that'd either break him or build him. His folks didn't get it. Tom grumbled about losing help, Linda cried quiet, but James saw no other door. The recruiter in Indy promised structure, purpose, a paycheck that didn't depend on rust bucket repairs. Basic training at Lackland, Texas, was hell unleashed, 6 a.m. runs in choking heat, drill sergeants barking till his ears rang, push-ups till his arms shook like jelly. He hated it, loved it, thrived in it. The chaos forged him, every barked order, every mile slogged through mud, sharpening a will he didn't know he had. His hands, once clumsy with wrenches, found a new rhythm with an M16, his eyes locking targets like they were born for it. Instructors noticed, called him Hawk for how he zeroed in, cool and unblinking. Sniper school followed at Fort Benning, Georgia, a brutal gauntlet of patience and precision, belly crawling through swampy brush, holding breath for minutes, one shot to nail a mark half a mile out. He graduated top, a lean, quiet 20-year-old with a gaze that could cut glass and a mind wired for the long game. 12 years unspooled in a haze of deployments, Kandahar's dust storms, Bagram's icy nights, missions where silence was survival and a single flinch could end it all. He'd perched on rooftops, scope trained on shadows, finger steady, waiting for the green light. He'd seen men drop, enemies, friends, blood-soaking sand, screams swallowed by wind. Choices piled up like spent casings, take the shot, hold fire, live with the ghosts either way. Each kill notched a weight on his chest, a tally he couldn't scrub. Nights alone in barracks, he'd lie awake, replaying faces, wondering if he'd traded too much of himself for the stripes on his sleeve. But one anchor held, Skylar. His daughter, his pulse. She was 9 now, a wiry kid with wild brown curls and blue eyes that sparkled like lake water under sun, but to James, she was still that squirming bundle he'd cradled in a sterile ward at St. Vincent's in Indy, her tiny fist latching his finger like she'd never let go. Her mom, Melanie, was a high school fling turned wife, pretty, sharp-tongued, a cashier at the local Kroger when they met. They'd married fast at 22, her pregnant, him fresh from basic, a shotgun deal in a courthouse with peeling paint. Skylar came screaming into the world 6 months later, and James swore he'd be her rock, no matter where the Air Force dragged him. Leaves were rare, precious, 2 weeks snatched between tours. He'd roll into Shelbyville, boots crunching gravel, heart pounding to see her. She'd barrel out the screen door, yelling, "Daddy," and slam into him, all knees and elbows, her grin splitting wide. He'd scoop her up, spin her till she squealed, then sit her on the couch with tales of desert skies and jet trails, promising one day they'd fly together over the Rockies or the Gulf. She'd hang on every word, eyes big, never asking about the blood behind his badges. She was his reset, his light in the murk. But the absences gouged deep. Every goodbye, her hugs got tighter, her "come back soon" softer, like she knew he might not. Melanie griped, letters turned phone calls turned silence, about him being a ghost dad. He'd send cash, call when lines allowed, but the gap widened. Was he failing Skylar? Could stolen weekends patch the months he missed? The questions chewed at him, but he shoved them down, focusing on the next flight home, the vow to keep her safe. One night, post-mission in Kuwait, beat to hell, he pulled her photo from a worn pouch, creased, edges frayed. Her grin, gap-toothed and fearless, sliced through the fog. His life, he saw, was a string of calls all for her. Whatever the cost, she was his guide star, pulling him through the black. After 18 months dodging bullets overseas, James landed back in Indiana, a knot of hope and fear twisting his gut. He'd run the reunion in his head, Skylar's sprint into his arms, Melanie's smile thawing the cold of those nights apart. It had kept him sane through the shitstorm. But pushing open the door of their weathered ranch house off Route 9, he froze. The air was thick, dead, no kid chatter, no stove hum, just a hush that set his nerves jangling. He found Skylar on the living room couch, tangled in a patched quilt, her frame frail, skin chalky against the firecracker he remembered. And 4 spiked her arm, pill bottles scattered like shrapnel on the coffee table. His heart seized. "Dad?" Her voice was a thread, but her face flickered alive. James knelt fast, taking her hand. "Hey, sweetheart, what's wrong? Where's Mom?" Skylar's light dimmed, eyes dodging. "Mom's not here." His throat clamped. "Not here? She at the store?" Skylar shook her head. "Slow, Mom left, she's with Mark now." The floor tilted. Mark? Who the hell was Mark? A name like a loaded clip. "Who's Mark?" he pressed, voice fraying. Skylar breathed deep, small but brave. "He's her new boyfriend." James rose, fists tight, locking the storm for her. "She left you here alone like this?" Skylar shook again. "No, she said she'd check in, but she doesn't much. Mrs. Dawson next door does my meds." Fury and haze roared in him, but he held it. "Why'd she do this, kid?" Skylar paused, then gut-punched. "She said if you found she's pregnant with Mark's baby, she'd tell folks. You hit her." James iced over, her words a barrage. Frame him as a wife-beater? Snatch Skylar with a lie? Melanie, his partner, his past, could she gut him like this? "You okay, kiddo? How you holding?" he asked, choking his hurt. Skylar shrugged, faint, "Tired but glad you're back." James gripped her hand, resolve stealing. Melanie's moves didn't matter, he'd shield Skylar from any blast. For her, he'd wade through fire. James couldn't stall. Skylar's frail state, sick and cast off by her mom, was a knife twisting. He had to act. Now, next morning, after a night pacing her side, he dialed CPS, voice trembling but cutting. He laid out Skylar's health crash, Melanie's ghosting, the neighbor's patchwork help. The agent grilled him. "Steady, we'll send someone fast, sir. Get your evidence lined up." James grunted assent, then tore through the house. Skylar's RX slips, pill chaos, shots of Melanie's void, building a wall of truth. Days later, a social worker hit the porch, clipboard in hand, eyes keen. She quizzed Skylar soft, health, Mom's visits, her shy truth cracking James open. The worker split, vowing a court report to lock Skylar's safety. He didn't ease up. The system lagged, he wouldn't bet on it. He tapped David Carter, a grizzled family law ace, spilling the mess. David scratched notes, nodding, neglects clear as day. We can slap an emergency block on your wife, push for full custody. That's the goal, James shot back, ironclad. Melanie can't swoop in and trash Skylar's life. Court came quick, a taut showdown. David hit hard, Skylar's decline, Melanie's vanishing, her carelessness. Melanie, served notice, swung back, swearing she'd done right. James' stack buried her. The judge ruled, Melanie barred without clearance, James held full reins till a full dive, that wind didn't kill his edge. Melanie'd counter, he smelled it, James dug in with David, dissecting every scrap, sealing his custody shot. No cracks allowed. He braced for a slog, but he was forged for it. For Skylar, he'd be granite. Melanie missed the memo on a dad's fight, James clocked Melanie and Mark wouldn't fade quiet. Their greed was a live wire, bound to spark dumb. When he caught they'd listed the house, 1.5 mil, his blood and sweat, without a whisper, it stung but didn't shock. A realtor's odd buzz tipped it, his place was up for grabs. Rage cooled to steel. That house was Skylar's spine, every penny he'd bled for. Their grab was a slap. He didn't blow hot, went cold, sharp. He ran it past David, pitching a sting to boomerang their greed. They lined up fakes, smooth, investors, James bankrolled, charming Melanie and Mark with a slick cash-out pitch. The duo bit, blind to the house being his solo, no deal without his John Hancock. Too greedy to check, the plants taped meets, Melanie and Mark crowing about ditching him, audio gold piling high. Weeks on, they signed a sham deal, so juiced they dropped a fat chunk from savings, betting big. James pounced. With David, he slammed an injunction, iced the sale. Tapes hit the judge, fraud in neon. Ruling snapped, house his, their cash gone, his fees on them. Melanie seethed, duped raw. Cash wasn't all, credibility cratered. Custody grabs or divorce plays. Dead after that flop, James exhaled weight. No party, just necessity. The house, Skylar's bedrock, stood firm, watching her chase bugs in the yard. He felt air. More scraps loomed, but he'd slug on. Skylar earned peace, he'd damn well give it. Melanie and Mark's rickety world caved fast. The house bust bled them dry, no outs left. Debt towered, rep a dumpster fire, no bank would bite. They hit Rick, a lone shark with teeth, knowing it was a gamble with no net. At a dive bar, Rick, plain but piercing, sized them up. How much? He cut, voice a slow blade. 900 grand, Mark croaked, eyes low. Rick leaned, scanning. That's heavy coin, you miss. Melanie jumped, quaking. We'll pay. We've got it mapped. Rick's chuckle was gravel. Plan snap, fine. 900K. 3 months full or it's more than cash. Panic and want locked them in. They grabbed the wad, half high, half doomed. The rush tanked fast. Schemes flailed, 3 months burned out, no dice. Rick's leash snapped. Calls, threats, then heavies rattled their door. They stripped bare, Mark's ride, Melanie's gems, nights crunching pennies, still shy. One night, her begging a lifeline, Rick loomed with 2 tanks. My money? He iced. Mark bluffed cool, we've got some more time. Rick's hand stopped him. I don't wait. Mark, you knew the stakes. No pay. Melanie, sheet white, groveled. A week, we'll get it, please. Rick's stare gutted their act. 3 days. No cash. You'll taste my disappointment. He peeled out, leaving them iced, their fuck up a tightening noose. Greed broke them. Now a colder player called shots, cornered by Rick's vice and their bust. They hit bottom. No legal juice left. They leapt dark, kidnapped Skylar for 1.2 mil ransom. Gutsy but sloppy, they banked on James' love cracking. Melanie, keyed to his weak spots, swore he'd pay. They stalked Skylar, hunting a gap. Rush botched it. They nabbed a kid from her school, wrong target. At a junk cabin outside town, they saw it, the girl wasn't Skylar. Freaked, they stalled, dump her and fold, or fake it to James. James felt the air shift. Skylar was safe at pickup, worn but fine. A missing kid buzzed, parents wired, no blame yet, but he knew. Rick's call cracked it, livid. James, talk, he bit, they're tossing my name in a ransom play, using me to squeeze you. James flared, what'd they do, Rick? Rick vented, thought I'd back a grab for your kid, grabbed the wrong one, slapped my name on it. I don't take that shit. James turned stone, where? Got it, I'll roll you there, Rick growled, his own axe sharp. James, cautious, hitched with Rick. At the cabin, they crept. James scoped, Melanie and Mark clawing over sobs. Mark wavered, Melanie dug in. Rick's crew ring tight, exits dead. They stormed, chaos cut short. Melanie blanched, Mark floundered, James, it's not. James nailed Melanie, you'd gamble my kid for profit, low enough to fuck an innocent? Melanie sank, mute. Rick loomed, arctic over, Melanie, you burned it, now pay. Their cries hit brick. Rick's guys pulled the girl, he caged them. James got her home, dodging Rick's cleanup. Skylar close, he swore off their past's reach. He locked it, no one touch his core again. Skylar was his, he'd armor her, always. Melanie and Mark's crash was savage, final. Rick, unyielding, ruled it, they'd torched every line. Hooking him to their kidnap was the kill shot. Not just debt, they'd smeared his grip. One black, biting night, his crew hauled them to a ghost dock. Cracked and pleading, they begged, but Rick was ice. Cement blocks locked their fate. Your call, he hissed, night swallowing, risky play, you're out, price is set. Blocks sank, dragging them under. Rick watched the calm, then barked, erase it. No whispers. James, miles from that end, built forward. Court sealed Skylar his, a brutal trek done. She, fragile, bloomed slow, meds clicked, his care piled high. The house, war's heart, stayed. He retooled it, cozy, hers, Melanie's scars fading under their laughs. One day, picnicking out back, Rick hit solo, plain but heavy. James, he eased up. James rose, taut. Rick. Didn't clock you here. Rick half smirked, checking, you, her. James nodded, Skylar's up. We're solid. Rick eyed her play, thawing, good dad. James, anyone fucks with you, I'll end it. No ask. James mixed thanks, unease. Rick meant it, hope not, thanks. Rick split. James grinned at Skylar. Peace peaked real, with her, he'd hold this start. Storms ahead? He'd smash them. The dark was dust, they'd craft good. James leaned into the quiet after, but it wasn't soft, more a held breath, waiting. Shelbyville's edges blurred as he rebuilt, every choice lashed to Skylar. The house got new paint, white over chipped gray, a porch swing where they'd read, her picking old Hardy Boys, him spinning jet yarns. Mornings, he'd brew coffee, fry eggs, her chatter filling gaps he'd once drowned in silence. School runs were his now, her backpack slung, him nodding to moms who eyed the soldier dad oddity. Docs tracked her meds, some rare blood thing, they said, but improving, her color creeping back. Nights, he'd sit by her bed, her breath steady, vowing no shadow'd slip through. Melanie's ghost lingered, though, court win or not, he felt her spite simmering somewhere. Rick's last words stuck too, a double edge, backup, but a debt he didn't want. Days stretched, steady but taut, till a letter hit from Melanie's lawyer, custody challenge, claiming he'd abandoned them first. Bullshit, but her pregnant angle and abuse lie still had teeth. David tore it apart, CPS logs, tapes, Skylar's shrink notes, and they countersued, nailing her fraud deeper. Court round 2 was a slog. Melanie, swollen with Mark's kid, played victim, but James' stack crushed it. Judge doubled down, custody his, her rights cut to supervised crumbs. She stormed out, Mark trailing, their fight echoing down the hall. James exhaled, but the win was cold. Skylar's peace came at war's cost. Melanie and Mark's spiral sharpened after. Rick's cash gone, house scam dead, they holed up in a Terre Haute trailer, clawing for air. Debts choked, credit shot, no jobs stuck. Rick's shadow loomed, they knew 3 days was a guillotine. They'd tried flipping dope, a desperate grab, but got rolled by a dealer, losing more. Nights were yells, Mark blaming her cursing him, till they hatched the kidnap, a last gasp at cash and spite. The botch wasn't just dumb luck, it was them, frantic, blind, cracking. James pieced it later from Rick, how they'd begged him post-flop, swearing they'd pay somehow. Rick didn't bend. That dock wasn't random, Terre Haute's river ran deep, a grave no one dredge. James kept Skylar close after, schooling her on strangers, locks triple-checked. Her shrink said she'd mend, abandonment stung, but his steady hand dulled it. School got better, friends, a science fair ribbon, her laugh echoing home. He cut Air Force ties, med discharge, honorable, pension small but enough. A buddy hooked him with a security gig in Indy, consulting, no travel, home by 6. Cash flowed steady, house paid, Skylar's meds covered. Rick's visit lingered, though, months later, a note slid under the door, clean slate. Your square. James burned it, unease prickling. Skylar didn't need that world touching hers. Years ticked, Skylar hit 13, lanky, sharp-witted, sketching planes like his stories. James grayed at the temples, softer but still wired tight. They'd hike Brown County hills, her grilling him on sniper tricks, him dodging with grins. One dusk, by a creek, she asked about Melanie, first time in years. He told it straight, her mom chose wrong, paid hard, but he'd never let it hit her. Skylar nodded, quiet, then hugged him fierce. That night, he saw it, peace wasn't a fluke, they'd forged it, brick by brick, from the ash of Melanie's wreck. Rick's specter faded, Shelbyville's grip too. James knew threats could rise, old foes, new ghosts, but he'd built a wall no bastard'd breach. Skylar was his star, his fight, his win.